Sarah Weber, welcome to the Lean Out podcast. How are you today?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm excellent. So let's start right in with having you introduce yourself for the audience and tell us about your work-life balance currently and how it's different from other people in your profession.
Well, thanks for having me. So I am trained as a pediatrician. I'm board certified in hospital medicine and pediatrics, and I work in academic medicine. And my practice is in sedation medicine. So I help kids get through difficult and painful procedures. I also have three kids and a lab and some chickens, and I'm married. Um, and like many people, my journey with my work and the interaction with my personal life has shifted a lot over the years, really starting with like when my first son was born, into up until now. And the way that I really think about this topic is um it's really a value of mine that all parts of me get time, space, and energy. And for me personally, those parts aren't all filled up by work. And so having balance or whatever you want to call it is making sure that I get to be creative. I get to have time outside. I get to have time with my family. I get time actually for solitude and reflection, which is something that took a long time for me to kind of feel validated that that was something I could have and could want. And I think that being able to do all those things is different than not everyone in medicine, but definitely, I see a lot of folks who feel like they don't have any time for them, the parts of them that are not filled up by work.
Very, very much true what you're saying. Almost everybody that comes to me inquiring about coaching says something to that nature where they don't feel that they have the time to dedicate to anything other than their job and bare bones making it through with the life activities. Like if they're parents, then, keeping their kids alive and safe and fed and things like that. And people really wanting to be able to express other sides of them again and re-find some of those things that they have lost over time with the treadmill of achievement and the crazy training and all of that. So I'm really curious what the nitty-gritty looks like. I don't want to say how you balance it all because that sounds cliche, but I mean that's basically what I'm asking is you have an academic appointment, you do pediatrics, you have it sounds like a niche that you're also working on in the academic practice. And then I know that you also do coaching on the side and you do wellness efforts for physicians. So tell me what a typical week looks like for you. How many hours are you doing clinical versus non-clinical and that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So, yeah, my work is definitely a kaleidoscope, which I think helps. Like I have crafted a job that does have a lot of different aspects, which I like and also allows me to have flexibility. So, I don't know how many hours a week I work. I don't really like count that. I pay more attention to just like what I feel like energetically. Do I feel drained? Do I feel like I have time to be present with my family in the evening? Week to week. So I a while ago walked away from doing inpatient medicine that had call and weekends to my position now, which is just clinic hours. I mean, ish. Our clinic's open from like 7 to 5 or 6. So, it's procedural clinic hours. And so I'm there about 2 or 3 days a week. And then the other days are really just like scattered through of all my other responsibilities. How I manage that is I do have a very robust practice of time blocking. So, I'll go 3 to 6 months into my calendar and make sure I have time blocked for writing, make sure I have time blocked for exercise, I really put a lot of effort in to make sure I'm not in meetings all day, every day in my non-clinical time. And I find that that's really common in academic medicine where you're just in meetings all the time and then you never have time to actually do your work or to think or to whatever. And so, I try to block a couple to, 2 to 4 hours a week for, I'll write writing in there, but any kind of creative thought work can go in that space. I also really am interested in, the idea of stacking, which is like, how can you make things count for more than one thing? So, like last week, I was listening to a faculty meeting and I like walked to the drugstore while I was listening, picked up the photos I needed for my kids' thing and walked back. So it's really about like, I think being creative and thinking outside the box about how can I, again, meet these different items that are important to me with the reality, because that was a 7:30 a.m. meeting. So it was like early morning. I could have sat at my desk and listened to it, but I, moved around. So those are some of the strategies I use. And then, logistically for me, I don't do academic work in the evenings and weekends, which, to be fair, like I know some people who do that and don't mind it. But for me, having off time is really important to my energy, the sustainability of my work. So I am and that took a lot of time to get there. I'll just say it wasn't like an overnight switch, but I'm at the point now where the amount of tasks I have to manage is doable mostly within like a work day.
Hmm. So you had started out doing pediatric hospital medicine, and it sounds like that is a recent transition to doing this purely clinical picture. What incited you to make that change? Was there a particular event that happened or something going on in your life that made you want to change that?
Yeah, good question. So I left residency. Did a chief year, and then I started in pediatric hospital medicine. I was spending half my time in the sedation clinic and half of my time on hospital medicine. And a few years in, it started to feel like maybe hospital medicine in this setting wasn't the best fit for me. Um, but it took me a couple years to act on it. So I stepped away from that probably 5, 6 years ago. So it has been a while. But it was a long period of first being comfortable with wanting change and working with all like the shame around wanting to do something different, feeling like, oh, did I pick the wrong thing? Wondering like, is there any medicine that I like? I had been burned out. Um, so I feel like it was continuing to listen to the part of me that wanted change, even if I wasn't acting on it right away. I was just like, this keeps showing up. This keeps showing up. And I think eventually I got to the point where I was really ready to say I wanted something different. And once I made the decision, there was no regrets. It was just took the time it took, which these things sometimes do.
Well, in that time, what did you do to try to figure out what you really wanted? Were there any particular tools or things that you would recommend to people that are in that position?
Yeah. I did so many things. For me, I think the first thing that started to clue me into like maybe my life could be different than it was getting back into my yoga practice. So, and for me, it's like both movement and I think the silence and the contemplation. And it just also shifts, the work mode, the doer mode is a little different than yoga mode. And so I think that anything you can do to sort of shift the gear to engage the part of you that's a little bit quieter, slower, reflective, that starts to create the permission that maybe things could be a little different. Maybe I don't have to be on the treadmill all the time. I was also really lucky that I have a best friend who is just a really great listener and like we can just be really honest with each other. And I think we talked about it a lot over time. And I remember after a particular yoga class we went to, I left the class, I just started crying. And it was like this realization that I was more than a doctor, which was both like there was grief and relief in that.
Mhm.
I realized how my identity was so caught up in being a physician. I was thinking about preparing for this podcast. I was thinking about how a lot of leaning out, I think, actually is working with that physician identity and recognizing like who else are you? Because sometimes leaning out is actually an energetic thing, even more than a time thing.
Yeah, for sure. The identities are such a big part of it. And the rules that people form around what they're doing that aren't necessarily true rules, like you must stop at the stop sign. It's like a rule that somehow got formed in your brain from a culture, whether it be from your work culture, from your family culture, or something like that, that you don't necessarily have to obey. And so identifying those and figuring that out, and also thinking about, who am I really? What are the different parts of me, like you said? And what if I couldn't do this anymore? What would happen? Would I just cease to exist? No, obviously not. None of us are like that.
Mhm.
So yeah, the more that I talk to people through coaching and through this podcast, the more people mention that their identities are one of the things that are the hardest part to let go of or to allow to transition when they're leaning out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, what's been the hardest part about all of this for you? Would you say it is the identity shifts, or is there something related to external factors or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean the identity shift definitely is hard, though I do feel like I'm kind of on the other side of it, where it's like being a doctor is a part of me, not all of me, and that feels really good. So like it was hard to get through, but now it feels good. I think it's an ongoing when you're self-defining things like success, what is enough, probably the ongoing challenge is just reconciling that for yourself. Knowing a lot of us are driven by our care, our want to contribute, these noble values. And so balancing those with other desires that we have. And I think that is probably always going to be, maybe challenge isn't the right word, but like a question and something that, I continue to face, which is like, how do I do both?
Yeah. Talk about how you define success and enough for you. How have you figured this out for yourself?
Yeah. So, for me, a lot of it has to do with how things make me feel, which is kind of the opposite, I feel like, of what we're taught. And, but I do think my body like is a really good signal of like often more than my mind of am I in what is enough? Um, because when I'm not, okay, how do I want to say this? When I'm in not enoughness, right? Where nothing I do is enough. So I'm doing more and more and more. That shows up as stress, tension, right? Tight throat, like so
Mm.
so checking in when I'm kind of not in that mode and noticing like, oh, we're believing right now that nothing we do is ever enough. Um so that's a big one. So for me, success, I think this is a ongoing iteration of a definition, but it has to do with, doing work I enjoy, in a way that feels authentic to me. So I think in medicine, we are trained to think of like, which type of medicine do you like? Right. And I feel like that for a long time steered me wrong because what is as important to me is not just the content of the work, but the what, the how, what am I getting to actually do? And then there is some amount of success, I think, including the ability to support my family. Then again, you can ask the question of, well, what's enough in that way when you think about finances? So for me, success isn't about unlimited growth or, an upward trajectory. It's like staying in my authenticity, doing, being in my integrity, supporting my family and doing something that feels like I can be curious about. I can use my creativity. And so all of those things are really like an internal barometer. They're not based on external perspective, which is a shift from, I think, of how a lot of us think of success.
Absolutely. I think that it's very common and easy to look at mathematic metrics or just objective numbers. How much of this do you have? And how much money do you have? And how much do you make? And what is your status? How many degrees do you have? So those are concrete and they are culturally acceptable ways to look at success. And it's really hard to depart from that and to think about it in a different way. And I love your answer of, well, it's when I feel good and I don't have these feelings that I associate with not enoughness. I love that. What's the best part about your blend of work and life right now? What do you love about it?
The phrase that comes to mind is, I feel like I'm living in my life. I'm not just managing my life or observing it. I'm actually in it. I don't know if that makes sense when I say it out loud, but it feels like a very felt thing. Like you notice the difference.
Well, what I'm sensing is maybe it's an aspect of presence. Like I actually feel like I'm involved and I have agency over what I'm doing and I am present with what I'm doing because I enjoy what I'm doing.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, granted, of course, there are to-dos and it's not like I am free of all these things,
Not
but
every day. Yeah.
right. But I'm also um, doing things for the sake of doing them, like, and there's joy in presence, which is something that I wasn't very connected to, in the past. That is something I often see physicians and clients come with, is like this disconnection to joy because there's more time spent managing life than living life.
Yeah. Tell me more about your wellness work. Do you do something through your institution and you do some coaching, or is it one or the other?
Yeah, I do some coaching. And then since about 2019, I think I've been the director of well-being for my department at my institution. So that work has evolved over time. A big part of it is managing the wellness survey data. So anyone who works for an organization, if they do a well-being survey, I help manage that survey and then work with leaders in the department to actually use the information as a tool to support their teams. So a lot of what I do is trying to create systems and a culture of well-being in the organization. The reason I got interested in coaching was because when you are the well-being person, you become kind of an informal, safe person for people to come to. So, like someone catch me in the hallway, like, how are you? Oh, and then they really tell me. And I wanted to be of better service to folks who are personally struggling. And, I recognize this tension between wanting the system to change and being the person who's really struggling and doesn't have time to wait for that. And so what I like about these two roles is, in the coaching role, I can show up for and be present and support people who are currently having a hard time or want to make a change. But then in the institutional role, I can help promote, culture and strategy to support well-being. So it just feels like I get to contribute to both. And I think both have their part. I've written several papers on different elements of well-being. So we did a scoping review a couple of years ago where we looked at all the papers that have ever been published on the work-life intersections, work-life balance, work-life synergy, to kind of demonstrate that we don't have a cohesive term or definition, which I think a lot of us know, but we're studying it. We're doing research on it without actually defining what the heck we're talking about. So I like conceptual papers like that sort of try to dig deeper into what do we even mean when we talk about professional fulfillment or work-life integration. And then I've done some other studies based on like survey data of like early career pediatricians. So yeah, that has been an element of my career that I've enjoyed, being able to kind of ask questions about these topics too and work on teams.
Since you mentioned the time stacking again, and you were talking before about time blocking and doing a lot of planning in advance and making sure that some of the like energy draining things, such as meetings, for example, are spread out more evenly and that you have time for the things that give you energy, like writing. So Do you use any particular tools for this time blocking that you would recommend to people? How do you do this?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I did read Newport's book, Deep Work, years ago. He's had a couple books since. But I'll tell you another book that really changed the way I do things is called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. Pre Oliver Burkeman's book, I think I was over managing my time. Where like productivity and time management have become like its own thing, its own beast. And what Oliver Burkeman's book is about is really like time management as a fallacy. Like we can have intention with our time, we can try to prioritize what we pay attention to, but time is finite. Our lives are finite. And until we accept that, we cannot manage our time. And that really, I think, what that allowed me to do was a few things. It allowed me to feel a lot less guilt about saying no and just limiting the number of things I'm doing. Because it was just like, yeah, I'm a person. Time is finite. Saying no is just like a normal thing. It's just like, if you were to say I'm full, I'm full of things. I'm full of food, whatever. So I think that is the first strategy, and I would recommend his book for people who are curious about that. Uh, so having a manageable number of things to do has allowed me to actually not have a complex system anymore for managing my time. I mostly just use my Outlook calendar. I look ahead. I look at each week, how many days am I in clinic that week? I do have a bullet journal. It isn't fancy by any means. I use it to take notes. And then I also use it to kind of have a long view of what's coming. So every 2 months, I'll write kind of the upcoming deadlines that I have, and then kind of make my to-do list around that. And that just helps me prioritize and frame like what comes first, what comes after that. And then I put things, in slots on my calendar based on how soon it needs to be. I do use Trello for work that I collaborate with other people because I think it's a good way to share tasks with like a team member, like my administrative assistant, my well-being role. But other than that, I found like simplicity is key to sticking to a way, right? A habit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I went to an all phone calendar system a long time ago, or to-do list system, because I felt like I was having too many moving
Right.
parts. I really like the bullet journal idea, but I find it difficult for me to have like multiple media to have to refer to. And then I end up forgetting one of them,
Yep.
inevitably. So I agree with you that I think simplicity is the key to this, to having a system that works for you.
Yeah, and that's sustainable, right? That you like you said. And actually it's very common. I find that a lot of physicians don't like using a bullet journal, but I think it's just a part of my person that likes to write more. But yeah, I think that's pretty common.
Cool. Yeah, and you have 3 children. What are their ages?
So 4.5 and almost 9 and almost 12.
And you have a dog and chickens and a husband. So I'm sure you are putting things related to family life into your calendar and your long-term planning system as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually we have it's not attractive, but we have a big whiteboard in our kitchen with the week and like what we're eating and who needs, and every week we write down who needs to go where different days, as another way just to like externalize everyone's plans. I keep the running grocery list on that. So there's some things that there are other like cues in my house or my life that I have to help us all kind of stay on track. I will say like my kids are in activities, but not a ton. And that's another part of the strategy is just like leaning out is like something we're all practicing of like doing things that we like and also not overscheduling ourselves.
I so agree with that. And part of it is out of necessity as someone who lives off grid and has to travel into town to do anything that's related to a social activity or even an academic or a sports activity for my daughter. she does work online, but then in order to do any kind of in-person things, we have to drive an hour. And so there's only so many days a week that I will allow those things to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, it would be great to have her be trying basketball because she's tall and to be able to like learn music and, to still do her jujitsu that she loves and then see her friends and like maybe do an art class. But it's like, I cannot do all of those things at once. So we pick one and then maybe fit in a couple of play dates and that's pretty much it. And I think in the future we'll be like that too. We kind of set this rule that we don't want to be the kind of parents that have to be gone every single weekend, spending hours doing some sort of practices, something we're going to try to influence her to do things that are not as time involved. And I only have one, so I'm sure, with three, it's so many more parts.
Yeah. Yeah, and that there are times of year when it shifts, like soccer season. We're at a lot of soccer games, but it's only 8 weeks, so that feels like, okay,
Mm.
for 8 weeks, our weekends can be busy with soccer, and they're not on travel teams that go far away by any means. I think that's the other thing is like just knowing for you, what your priorities are, when you can kind of like stretch them a little, and then when you want to just be like, no, we're not doing that extra thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Is there any advice that you would give that we haven't already talked about to people who are listening that feel like they are overwhelmed or burned out? You talked about having some experience with that yourself or stuck on the treadmill of achievement and want to make a change, but don't feel like they can.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's common. You're not alone and nothing is wrong with you. And also, I think that there's possibility. And so anytime you can start to build in space, I think to slow down, and reflect on what not just really matters to you, but how would you like things to be? How would you like your life to be? Which can be hard. It can be hard to be creative and imaginative when you're burned out. But, if you can find some spaces to do that and to start just trusting that maybe it's a little bit possible. I think building that self-trust that you can make decisions and you might know what actually is right for you in your life and that you are more than your accomplishments. I think, if building that trust starts with actually connecting with yourself, which we don't feel like we have time for, but I think it's really hard to build that trust without that time.
Yeah. Sarah, thank you so much for being on the show and for sharing with us your journey and your wisdom. And where can people find you if they want to learn more or connect with you?
Yeah, so I am on LinkedIn. You can look up my name, Sarah Weber with two B's. I think my handle has some numbers after it that I can't remember. I'm also on Substack, which is where I write with one of actually my best friend and I. We write. She's a former PA and she does a lot of really beautiful work in the world. And my Substack handle is Wild Geese SW, and that's
Wild Geese, SW. I love it.
from Mary Oliver's poem Wild Geese.
Yeah.
You know.
Awesome.
And then I have a website too, sarahwebermdcoaching.com.
And it's Sarah with an H, correct?
It's Sarah with an H, yep.
And Weber with two B's. Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me.